Hello. Today I will be talking about Talzin Yellow Tempo Control, the best sleeper deck of the Set 6 format. I had the pleasure of piloting this over the weekend in the 3v3 team event at BIATL to a second place finish, going undefeated up until the final round, with my teammates Red Dragon on Oddhan and Grumpy Elephant on Anakin Data Vault. Table of contents for this video are on the stream. This will be primarily focused on covering the deck itself, and the tournament recap will be a separate video coming out later this week. Looking at the two lists that I played at BIATL, we have the 3v3 list on the right and the 8K list on the left. I will be focusing on the 8K list for this video, although I did go 1-2 in both pools with that. More on why later, because it is a bit more refined than the 3v3 list. Mystic Reflection, which was a staple card throughout set 5 in this deck, ended up coming back in for Drain Essence as a additional way to enable Anakin, which is a little more consistent in certain matchups where Bamboozle is not relevant. Sith Assassin ended up coming in to fill a hole that taking Drain Essence out of the deck left, being able to kill an Ogdo Bogdo or force an Ogdo Bogdo to attack into it, and Constructed Saber came back in for the first time since Set 5 Worlds, since as a way to help race and pressure in matchups where it is needed, which turns out is almost all of them, so that might end up being brought back into the main in the future, and functioning much better in a meta that does not have ways to one-shot Talzin Yellow easily on deploy. So jumping into the list, I'm going to break down the cards one by one. Some of them will be broken down in sections, starting with Enticing Reward. Since this is one of the core cards of the deck, Enticing Reward, Client, and Anakin form the backbone of this deck, with Bamboozle and Mystic Reflection complementing the Anakin and Enticing Reward. I've been told by many people that have tried this deck, including teammates, including people on opposing teams that have played against it and tried to replicate it, that this is a very hard deck to pilot. So keep that in mind if you're considering playing it. It requires a lot of thought and a lot of committing to things to memory. Specifically with that and the Enticing Reward usage of being able to learn the sequencing of the deck. Enticing Reward basically informs the player of pockets of 8. So assuming Enticing Reward hits 2 events when it's used, or 2 non-units when it's used, there are 8 cards remaining, go through all 3 Enticing Rewards, and now the information of the remaining cards is known in 8 card pockets. So it is very important to retain that information to inform the flow of the game in very grindy matchups. Enticing Reward forms the backbone of this deck by giving access to card advantage in grindy matchups, being able to chain into itself, eventually leading to massive card advantage over the opponent. In addition, in non-grindy matchups, or just in general, it functions as a discord outlet for the heroic cards when the heroic cards are not easy to get out of the hand, specifically on the 5 resource turn. So this is a card that normally is going to be played on the 5 resource turn, although it could be played earlier, and obviously can be played later, in pairing with a 4-drop. Comes down on 5, 4-drop, or existing cards on the board, clean up whatever it goes onto, and if it is a unique, get to keep the 2. If it is a non-unique, it functions as a discard outlet for the heroic card to set up the Anakin next turn. The heroic cards of choice to be paired with it currently, Bamboozle and Mystic Reflection. This previously used to be just Mystic Reflection in the set 5 meta. It was added by Red Dragon after our Worlds list because he felt that the deck needed a little bit more mid to late game power, and we currently were off of Anakin at set 5 Worlds. Mystic Reflection was added as a way to have an outlet to force throw, a 1-drop discard to force throw, in addition to being able to just kill early shielded units, specifically at the time Itinerant Warrior, which is still very relevant now, if played on turn 2 by Oddhan, and all of the various 2/2 shieldeds that can be played on turn 1. I had figured that this might be a bit weak going into set 6 with the post force throw ban. I had not played post force throw ban since all of my set 5 PQs were pre force throw ban, so I ended up taking it out in large part due to limited testing going into BIATL and favor of just Bamboozle. Quickly realized having only Bamboozle as the out versus something like Hantu Blue doesn't work. All their units are unique. You can't discard Bamboozle from Enticing. Eventually have to find a way to play Bamboozle because you can't discard a yellow card with it to play it for free. So it becomes really finicky. So Mystic Reflection is still very important to have in the deck to enable Anakin against a deck like Hantu Blue. It's also, as Red Dragon pointed out after our team pool, very good against, or not very good, but creates a potential line against space aggro decks where they open with 2 space units, one of them normally having 2 health, and then Mystic Reflection can clean it up on the second turn, setting up the Anakin for the 6 resource turn. Bamboozle, just very, very good against the pilots that can be floating around in the current meta. I don't think the pilot decks really function that well and probably shouldn't be played, but the meta is extremely wide. It's not really concentrated into what I would say are the most powerful decks, stuff like Han 1 and Han 2. And there are a lot of space decks going around. There are a lot of pilot decks going around. There's still Boba, Data Vault, and now there's Adhan, which Adhan, I think, is a deck that should be being played in the current meta. It's probably the only space pilot deck that I personally think should be looked at in the current meta, and Bamboozle is very much needed to deal with that deck, and it also helps against something like Boba Data Vault. And it, strangely enough, can function as a removal. So in addition to doing stuff like removing shields, it removes experience. And a card that is somewhat popular in the current meta is Blue Leader. Blue Leader can come down, ambush something in ground, and be left with 3 life remaining, 2 life remaining. If it's 2 life remaining, Bamboozle just straight up kills it. If it's 3 life, Bamboozle plus the Talzin ping will end up killing it by removing the 2 experience on it. So quite interestingly, this can function as a removal in some scenarios for a unit that's being kept alive because of experience tokens. Hotshot Blaster, moving on to the next card, is just core reach card in honestly almost any deck. You don't even need to be playing red or yellow specifically. A lot of decks just end up throwing this in at this point just because it is so strong. Just being able to have the access to a Hotshot Blaster. For example, Han 2 Blue, having red, it can play it from hand for 1, but it could just smuggle it for 5 and you're fine. And then pretty much any deck they could just smuggle it for 5, just throw it in. Very good card. Possibly one of the most broken cards currently in format. Obviously, we're going to be playing it. Looking at the 2 drops, Karis and Secretive Sage are forming the core of this package. Depending on the matchup, you normally want one or the other as your opening play. Secretive Sage being very good into decks that want to do something like ping Tarkin Town, or something like Ogdo Bogdo, where the Ogdo Bogdo could just eat the Karis, could just eat the Acolyte. Karis being very good opening into everything else, sometimes functioning as a turn 2 play if a turn 2 play is not in hand, or a turn 2 force backup play is needed, the Trace Acolyte coming out beforehand, eating whatever interaction the opponent has, followed up by Karis. Sith Assassin was something that was added by Red Dragon specifically to fill a role of dealing with Ogdo Bogdo. This originally was a one Night Sister Warrior, and with the removal of Drain Essence, there needed to be more cards other than Secretive Sage that could be an opener that are good against Ogdo Bogdo. Sith Assassin filled that role, and when it can't be played, if on the draw and the opponent plays something like an X4, sometimes it will be right to just not play it, but with Elite P38, or just gaining the force sometime later from something else, if something's left with 1 health, by attacking into Sith Assassin, it can be cleaned up later. But specifically, P38 is one of the best follow-ups to this play, and it is, as I said, primarily there as an additional answer to Ogdo Bogdo. On the play, great card to just gain the force with. Not ideal, but it's not bad. P38 is primarily there. This is a flex spot. This could easily change to other things. It's been 7th fleet in the past. It's been a third client. I think I think the third client is actually very much necessary. It is can pop shields off things like an itinerant warrior, like opposing secretive sages, like opposing Krennics. Even like if there is a Talzin yellow in the mirror, it can pop the Shin Hati shield, the client shield. Very versatile card. It also gives some reach against opposing X4 turn 1s or 2/4 turn 1s, where if they go base, then something like Karis or Trace Acolyte can go into their 2/4, and then with P38 plus the Talzin -1/-1, the 2/4 can be cleaned up. So it is a nice card to have access to. Shin Hati, great card. The fact that it's an X2, and this also applies to P38, can be a little bad going into the later turns with stuff like Anakin in a lot of decks, and Bo-Katan now picking up some popularity in blue heroic decks that are going for big units, big grindy games. But as a turn 2 play, very, very powerful, hidden, so it can't be interacted with right away. And then being a 4/2 shielded, this is going to be cleaning up a lot of units, and even if the opposing turn 2 play is a 3/5 with the Talzin ping, this will always be able to kill it. And in general, this deck, because of cards like Shin Hati, because of Karis with the Talzin ping, it presents the opponent with some pretty hard choices, because if they ever try to go base, then the unit can just go into their unit, and the Talzin ping can clean them up. Client, as I said, is one of the 3 core cards I consider for this deck. Should definitely be a 3 of. I was having a lot of trouble fitting in the third one, so I just threw it in the sideboard going into these events. It had also been a 2 of towards the end of set 5. Had been a whole bunch of things in iterations of the deck, but as I've played the deck more and more, I found that this is just good in every matchup. Having a 2/5 shielded alone is pretty powerful, especially with a card like Hotshot Blaster being able to make it into a 4/5 with the shield. And then if the force has been acquired at some point prior, especially if it's a curve out and for whatever reason this has to be done on the 4 resource turn, having the 2-drop getting the force, this now kills a 5 health unit and still has a 4/5 body left behind. But the biggest thing is the healing. The healing is just good against everything. It gets the deck away from reach, like from Grey Dragon and Han 2 blue, like from Hotshot Blaster Kellerin against Han 1 green. Against space aggro, this is one of the most important cards, as there needs to be some damage mitigation to be able to race them effectively. 100% should have been a 3 of, will be a 3 of in the main deck going forward. Power of the Dark Side, core removal card. Can be a little bad if the meta starts favoring double 1-drop plays, but even then, it's good to have access to, because if the board's ever contained, even against a space aggro deck, let's say they have 1 space unit and they try to flip onto it, power just kills it. Just great leader removal in general when the board can be contained. I wouldn't ever really go down on this card, although there is an argument to go down on it if it is a go wide meta. 4-drop slot is something that does require a lot of thought and attention. In set 5, this had changed many, many times. It had been Assassin and Shurit. It had been Tyrannus and Assassin. Tyrannus and Shurit is where it ended at the end of set 5. It had been all 3 of them in various combinations, ending on Tyrannus and Shurit, because Quinlan was the most played deck, at least in my local area, and arguably the best deck in the format pre-force throw ban. When I was playing PQs, having the ability to throw down a 3/5 that can reduce incoming attacks by 2 is just so powerful against ground aggro strategies. Also very good against Sabine when Sabine is going a ground line. Has been taken out now in favor of the Talzin Assassin Darth Tyrannus package, because there can be a little more space in the meta, and when there's not space, it tends to be more grindy, where having the defensive option isn't really as impactful as having 2 offensive options, being able to build a body while taking away a body from an opponent. Although I could easily see this ending up being all 3 in the main deck again in the future, going into the PQ Season 4 Set 6. They're all very strong, all have very specific uses. Tyrannus, I think, is probably the best of the three overall. Having a 4 attack ambusher that can then clean up a 5 health unit with the Talzin activation is just very, very powerful. And with X4 turn, like 2/4 turn ones, being able to attack into a 2/4 with ambush first and then shield after is just an extremely powerful thing to do. And if the shield is gotten on after, it can be combined with Hotshot on the 5 resource turn to really block 6 health leaders, such as Han 1, from flipping, while still leaving a body behind. Moving into the removal package, these would admittedly be better as other units, such as Churret, because in this game, especially with the direction it's gone, it is very much about developing a body while interacting with the opponent, and Sentinel is, in a way, interacting with the opponent. However, there is a certain amount of event density required for Enticing Reward. I had been keeping this at 20 throughout every iteration of the deck. This was the first, including the 3v3 event, this was the first iteration of the deck that went to 19. I could potentially even see it going to 18, but breaking Enticing Reward feels really, really bad. Hitting one non-unit off an Enticing Reward can be acceptable, so this number, maybe it's a little adjustable, maybe it could go down a little bit. I could see these becoming reach cards. They can flex into reach cards like Surprise Strike, like the Constructed Saber that's in sideboard, a little more on that later. And each event individually has very good usage, with Takedown being a good way to interact with enter play ready units such as Fast Falcon and Cassian. Because this deck hits for 4 with a lot of its units, Shin Hati, Darth Tyrannus, Mother Talzin herself, with the -1/-1 being 4. Cassian is not something that could be killed when it's immediately deployed unless it's a direct 1-to-1 removal. So Takedown does fill a nice role in dealing with that. I don't know if it needs to be a 2 of. If Space Aggro is a lot bigger in the meta, then this is better. It's also really good against certain leaders, especially 6 health leaders that don't need to be removed from the board right away, but there aren't many of those. But for example, Han 1 yellow, if for whatever reason, let's say there's a Churret in front of it and it doesn't want to attack, and Talzin yellow gets the initiative, or Han 1 claims, then Talzin yellow hasn't claimed yet, it can -1 the Han and then clean it up. And just having access to this 2-kill leaders that have been weakened in general is very nice. So I do really like having access to this card. I don't know if it needs to be a 2 of going forward, though. Maybe 1 goes to sideboard, and then that comes in against stuff like Fast Falcon, maybe Cassian. Fel the Dragon, I think, is probably the one that stays beyond Power of the Dark Side, probably the one that always stays in. Being able to kill something big for 4 resources and then do something else behind it is very, very powerful. A lot of big things in the meta. The one deck that frequently, or the one archetype of deck that will not frequently have something that can hit is something like Go Wide Space Aggro. Odd Han specifically doesn't normally have anything it could hit, but Vader, for example, can end up having some big ships that this will end up being able to remove. No Glory is more of a utility piece. It has some very good uses, like against Ruthless Raider, against Owen Lars, so a Han 2 blue playing Owen Lars, being able to gain that when defeated ability and find a force unit, so the card basically replaces itself while denying the card advantage to Han 2 blue, is very powerful. Lightmaker is a new card that this card is very good against, being able to take Lightmaker and exhaust the opponent's board in space. Very, very powerful. I may mess with switching these to Constructed Saber in some capacity, or Surprise Strike in some capacity going forward, and looking at a more tempo-skewed list, similar to the list that I played at Worlds. Now that Force Throw has been banned, it's something to explore. With Anakin, core card of this deck, talked about him a little bit earlier. Just super versatile, one of the strongest cards in the game at the moment, even without being able to enable his second -3/-3, even just being a 6-drop 5/7 with 1 -3/-3, still so powerful. One of the biggest reasons to be playing this deck at the moment, especially with Enticing Reward giving a discard outlet. on the fitting into the curve on the 5 resource turn. Cad Bane and Avenger finishing the bomb package. I think the bomb package being at or around 7 is very important. It maybe can go a little lower, but in grindy matchups, more would have to be added to the sideboard, because in grindy matchup, a certain threshold has to be met. So, for example, against Ray Data Vault, against Hantu Blue, grindy heroic matchups, or any opposing grindy matchup that has good 1-to-1 removal, but specifically those because it's normally a set amount. So, Ray Data Vault, Hantu Blue, they normally hover around like 3 to 4. A good hard 1-to-1 removal, so like 2 Fell the Dragon, 1 Arrival's Fall, for example. Having 7 bombs allows for 1 or 2 that are drawn early to be resourced, then the next ones to hopefully pull out the hard removal, not actually lose the unit to trading on board, which opens the door for something like an Avenger to come in at the very top end to close out the game. These can be edited a little bit, so if the meta... If the deck needs to skew more towards a tempo game plan, the Avenger would be the first to go, probably moving to sideboard and lowering the curve a little bit, adding more aggressive tools, but still trying to maintain the control aspect of the deck for when it's needed in a grindy matchup that wasn't able to be closed fast. So, moving into the matchup spread, this is not exhaustive. The matchup, the meta at the moment is extremely wide. It's been extremely wide for a while now. And going into a fresh set 6 meta, we don't really know where things will fall. A lot of the data that I had gained with my team did cover a lot of the decks that we did see at BIATL, at the first major tournament of this set. And I will also add that this is not an extremely extensive sample size. It is a good amount going into the triple digits. However, it's spread out over a lot of different decks, so no individual deck has like an extremely high sample size. I'd say probably an average of 20 per in the internal data that I'm not sharing. But to talk about each matchup very briefly, it's color-coded, so the deeper the red, the harder it is. The deeper the green, the better it is, the more I want to see it. So, starting with Talzin Red Force, this is kind of out of the meta at the moment, and I think it's probably going to stay that way. This was one of the harder matchups because of the way Karis interacted. Shinhati being a 4-power unit on the 4 resource turn after Hidden's fallen off, an opposing Karis can just attack into Shinhati and kill it, while a friendly Karis attacking into a red unit, let's say the Grand Inquisitor. Having the Grand Inquisitor having 3 attack on defense means the friendly Karis can't even die attacking into it, so it can't even trade up in one action. It's got to be over multiple actions. It's a little finicky. It makes navigating the early game pretty hard. Talzin Red also having the ability to go wide with Krennic, like let's say just play Acolyte on turn 1, the 2/3, when defeated, one on attack, gain the force. Being able to play that on turn 1, or Karis on turn 1, and then going into Krennic plus one of the 2-drop ones that when defeated on turn 2, presenting 3 bodies, can be a bit challenging as well. So a lot of the opening lines from Talzin Red gain board advantage for Talzin Red. And then on the flip turn as well, they've lost Force Throw, so that's some interaction, some ability to kill Talzin immediately that's been removed. However, they still have Force Lightning, so if they have a Force unit still on the board, which Talzin herself, the opposing Talzin, is a Force unit, it can be a little hard to flip the friendly Talzin, the yellow Talzin, into it. Makes this matchup a little hard to navigate over those first few turns, but if it has been navigated, once that's passed, it is very heavily in yellow's favor, and yellow does have tools to get there. Client especially doing a lot of work here. P38 doing some work here as well, removing shields or being able to finish off something that is left with 1 health in the early game, with the Talzin ability being able to add an additional damage. This might not be a soft red. It may be more towards a 50-50, may even be a little bit favored. I have to look at it more with the removal of Force Throw. Haven't looked at it since Force Throw was banned. Anakin Data Vault, breakout deck of BIATL. break out McClunky deck of BIATL with my teammates Grumpy Elephant and Pasquale working on this a lot, and Tyler picking it up day of and having a great run with it. Tyler or Dark, depending on what you may know him by. This is again something that can be a little hard to navigate in the early turns. The initiative matters a lot, so this is something that had been explored between Grumpy Elephant and myself in set 5. Whoever has initiative has a big advantage. Karis, for example, without initiative, just dies to the Anakin activation on any of their opening units. So a Secretive Sage is very important here. Sith Assassin actually does perform a little bit of an interesting role here in leaving any of the 2/4s, like the new Min Bonteri, apologize if I'm not pronouncing that right, leave her 1 life, and then P38 can clean her up. So that's an interesting interaction that Sith Assassin adds. On the play, this does end up favoring Talzin a lot, just because then Talzin's able to attack in, gain the force. Doesn't even need to necessarily attack into the unit, because the Anakin's also going to be trying to go for board control, so they will attack into Talzin's unit. So Karis on the play, let's say they play Min Bonteri, then if Min Bonteri attacks into Karis after Karis has gained the force, then that's with the trigger, it's able to eat Min Bonteri. Shin Hati is very powerful because of the shield. Client is good because of the shield. Secretive Sage because of the shield. Shielded units are very good here. Tyrannus is very good and because of the shield. And the big thing about this matchup is Anakin flips on 6 and Talzin flips on 5, and both are trying to go for the ground control primarily. So Talzin's normally able to acquire it, which can put Anakin in a bit of an awkward position on the flip turn, since Talzin normally will have a board already presented to Anakin not having a board. The other big thing to note about this matchup is one of the breakout cards is Queen Amidala, especially for the Anakin deck. Queen Amidala gives 3 bodies, which work really well with the Anakin ability, being able to buff them up further and trade up like very well. Talzin has access to Talzin's Assassin, which just kills her outright, and because Talzin ideally will have board control with the correct line, or have even parity with the correct line, even being in grounds, can have the ability to just clean up the token, and then play something like Tyrannus plus Enticing Reward on the Queen Amidala. So this is, I think, at least slightly favored because of the finicky nature of those early turns. It can be a little hard to nail that down. I would imagine it's at least slightly favored, and initial testing had shown that in set 5. I don't think it has changed much for set 6. Han Blue Force was one of the decks that I designed Talzin Yellow to beat, or was one of the reasons why I initially was working on Talzin Yellow. Can be a little hard. Similarly, a lot of these are along those lines, hard to navigate in those early turns. Ogdo Bogdo opener can be very hard to deal with, especially if they just start going face and there isn't a good way to answer it. It just eats stuff like Karis and Trace Acolyte. If they have initiative, they just play it first, can't play 2/4 because then Ogdo just kills it and heals and then keeps Talzin off the force. So then having the tools, Secretive Sage, Sith Assassin, so that Ogdo can be gotten off the board are very important. Grogu can be pretty hard to deal with as well, but can be a little complex how to go through lines to deal with him. Power of the Dark Side is the most simple one. However, without initiative, Grogu comes down and then they play another unit to insulate him against power. But with Shin Hati, Karis, a good curve, and then into something like Tyrannus, into something like Assassin, there is a lot of ability to have the reach to get him off the board, and then be +1 units, +2 units on the flip turn, and then once ground control is achieved, it is very hard for Han Blue Force to win. It is an extremely favored matchup at that point. Talzin's able to just start getting off enticing rewards and keep Han off force so that they cannot get off Kiadi, And then without Force Throw, they have no real good way to threaten the Talzin flip. It's a very, very hard matchup once those early turns are navigated. Han 2 ECL, similar experience. One of the big things that makes this a little harder for Talzin is specifically Nemec, Karis Nemec. That card is just insanely broken. It's also, I'll talk about it a little later when we get to Sabine. It just creates some really hard scenarios for Talzin, especially if they have initiative and they just start going face. Like if Talzin tries to take it off the board, they take 3 damage since Han had initiative, and then they take 2 damage from the token as well. That's already 5 damage on base. It can be a bit hard to navigate. Similarly, with the Anakin deck, Queen Amidala is a big player in that deck, and having the minus effects helps a lot there. So if those early turns can be navigated, if the Nemec can be overcome, the Talzin deck does end up pretty heavily in the driver's seat. But having access to ECL, like stuff like ECL Wrecker, ECL Poe, they deal with the Talzin play really well. So with Churret currently being in the side, this is one of those matchups where if it's very prevalent in the meta, it's really desired to have Churret in the main to be able to protect the Talzin flip. At least I think slightly favored, might be a little darker green. Would have to look into it more. Han 1 green. This matchup is very tricky. It's very hard for them to open up with a ship into Chewie just because Power of the Dark Side exists. Sometimes players will just feel like they have to make the Talzin play it. Talzin have it if they have some experience with the matchup. However, my teammate Philip and I have played this matchup a lot. It's normally not correct to risk it because it is possible to win anyways, but it is pretty hard, especially with the change from Kira in the Han 1 green list to Typho. Kira was very, very important since Talzin Yellow is the reactive deck on the 4 resource turn. Kira comes down first. If it's not 2 4-drop plays, like if it's not Assassin plus Tyrannus, they just name what the reactive 4-drop play is, which can be a bit troublesome. Makes Talzin really want to play that first and then try to threaten the Kira with something like Shin Hati. It can be that is really the most pivotal thing. If they have the Kiras navigating that, if it's Typho, the matchup just becomes a lot easier because there's so many ways to get Typho out. Like a shielded Shin Hati just damages it. Tyrannus shielded just goes in and kills it. The other big thing in this matchup is Karis, the Talzin Yellow Karis, not Nemec. I'll refer to Nemec and Talzin Yellow Karis as Karis. Karis, Shin Hati, and Tyrannus all kill Han on flip with the Hotshot Blaster, and Talzin herself, if the Han player has not ramped, kills Han on flip with the Hotshot Blaster. It's very hard for Han to navigate that. Even if they ramp, like if they spend a turn ramping and the Talzin player has gone Karis or Shin Hati in their opening line, it's very risky to just flip Han into it. So this might even be a darker green than it currently is. It can be very hard for Han 1 to navigate. Moving on to Han 1 blue. This is something that can be very, very hard. This might even need to be a deeper red, because if the Han 1 blue player hard mulligans for the villainy card and hits the Anakin, which hitting both isn't incredibly likely by the 5 resource turn, but if they are able to get both and go row villainy turn 1, and then on the 5 resource turn have something, especially like Churret on the 4 resource turn, having a Churret in front with the force gained already. This is supposed to be Han 1 blue force. The Churret's very hard to get through since nothing can hit for 7. Really have to like kind of try to hit it for 6, and then use the Talzin ability or hit it with the takedown. That's another one of the core reasons to include takedown, is to hit opposing Churrets. However, even through all of that, on the Han flip turn, the same as the Talzin flip turn, they have access to Anakin because of rowing the extra card to flip Han, and then if Talzin's flipped into it, hit it with the -6/-6, it's now an 0-1 leader flip. It's very hard to navigate. It is navigable, and if the Han 1 player is contained and they're susceptible to like a Power of the Dark Side on flip or something like that, or just the Talzin yellow is able to get the ground control over those first few turns, it does become a very easy matchup because the tools that Talzin has are just a lot more potent. They're going to be resulting in more cards to board and more cards to hand, enticing reward, more cards to hand, and then units like Tyrannus and Assassin just having more access to the units that you play and kill something with than Han 1 Han 1 blue does. Odd Han. So the Han 1 blue might actually even be slightly green. I just haven't looked into it enough. Odd Han Tarkin Town. Probably going to be the hardest matchup going into the set 6 meta. This is a deck that I expect to pick up some traction if it hasn't already been picking up traction. It wasn't too represented at BIATL, but it is very, very powerful, especially with the Cinta version, which is what my teammate Red Dragon played. I'll be going into this a little more in the BIATL recap video, but the way he beat me in round 2 of Pool 1, in Game 1, he waited till 6 resource to deploy, and then had the units to get the full 6 untap and went Sudden Ferocity, untap 6, Cinta, hit for 10 on a 1 power unit. Which is very hard to try to contain. Client is very important here. Assassin's very important here. Getting to the 6 resource turn and having Anakin online is very important here. So stuff like Mystic Reflection, Bamboozle. Bamboozle is by far the most important card. The Confiscate, actually being a third Bamboozle, is the most helpful in this matchup specifically. Although, that was something I wanted to... So, small addition to the deck breakdown that I'll just quickly add right here. One of the reasons switching the third Bamboozle to a Confiscate was because of the addition of Constructed Saber, having the ability to go against the 5 deploy pilots or even a 4 deploy pilot, being able to go Constructed Saber for racing purposes, and then have 1 resource open without needing to discard a yellow card to kill the pilot flip is very powerful. A little less powerful here just because they're deploying Sudden Ferocities and stuff too. It really wants to be a third Bamboozle, and it, depending on the popularity of this deck, might mean that Confiscate still needs to be a third Bamboozle. I think this matchup is potentially something that can be figured out. Having the third client will help. Having the third Bamboozle will help. But currently, I would say this is like as bad as a 30% win rate over the match. And one of the primary reasons to not play this deck is this deck and the other space decks. Moving on to Cad Tarkin Town, both the Weenie version and the non-Weenie version. I think this is something that is very in favor of Talzin, because it is doing something that is very similar to what Talzin is trying to accomplish, but has a 6-flip leader. Having that 6-flip leader, similar to Anakin, means that Talzin is normally able to find a window to get board control by the flip turn, and then once they have board control, or at least even board state going forward, they just have better late game tools. They better outgrinding, better units that are killing things while being deployed and presenting and leaving a body behind. Enticing reward, just being able to get huge card advantage here, although like some amount could technically come out after sideboard. The early turns can be a little hard to navigate, especially with the Weenie, but because they have 1 health, if anything really does ever stick, it is very hard for Cad to come back from that. So like Secret of Sage, for example, unless they have the 2-1 that removes the upgrade and then can ping with Cad, unless they have specifically that, it's going to stick, it's going to gain the force, and Cad's pretty much just done from there. And even if they can deal with it, almost always Talzin's able to gain the force on the flip turn, and once Talzin's gained the force, then Tyrannus is active, then Assassin's active, and the game's pretty much locked from there. Constructed Saber is also pretty powerful in this matchup if they don't have a way to remove it, because it lets Talzin hit for 8, so 3 plus 2 from the Saber, plus 2 from Raid is 7, and then -1 makes it 8, which just kills Cad on flip. I would say this is potentially the best matchup for Talzin, either version, because of how hard it is for CAD to maintain a ground board presence without constantly going into Talzin's units and going for the board control. They just can't push damage to base, and then eventually Talzin gets control and beats them. Quinlan was a hard match to navigate in last set. I thought that it was very favored for a long time, and then realized that it wasn't as set 5 progressed. One of the things that I found was adding Churret in helped a lot, but the biggest thing was that they had force throw and being able to and flipping Talzin into getting themselves force throwing themselves and discarding a Han and then just killing Talzin outright. That was just really, really hard to get by. It does have Nemec now, which, as I talked about earlier with Anakin and Han 2 ECL, talked about earlier with Han 2 ECL, Nemec is just a very powerful card against Talzin, being able to put damage on the base no matter what. So it is possibly still an unfavored matchup, but I think maybe with the loss of Force Throw, this does become favored, especially with having the clients in the deck now as well. Turrets can come in from side, or some amount of turrets maybe come back into the main deck if this is one of the decks that's prevalent in the meta. And then this might actually end up being a favored matchup. It is very, very hard to navigate in general. I would say Talzin Yellow is just very hard to navigate almost any matchup because of how pivotal those early turns are. Padme, I wasn't even sure if I should add this. We did do some testing internally against Padme. Like, these are all decks that had some amount of testing internally. But it is just so favored for Talzin. And in general, I found that a lot of decks really struggled against, that Padme really struggled against a lot of decks, that I didn't really think that this was a deck that would see play, but it did see some play at BIATL, so I did want to add it to this list. We're just so extremely favored. They flipped on 6. Padme flips on 6, has 6 health, so anything with Hotshot Blaster, same thing with Han 1, except now it's flipping a turn later, and Karis with Hotshot. It has 3, so Karis doesn't do it, but Shinhati, Tyrannus, Talzin, all with Hotshot. Kill Padme on flip, and it's very hard for Padme to actually have ground control going in to their flip turn. Almost always by the flip turn, Talzin has gotten ground control. So even with Tarkin Town being able to kill like one early unit, sometimes it's even really hard to activate Tarkin Town, and this applies to all the Tarkin Town matchups, where they're only playing one thing a turn, or like one thing to ping a turn without like a way to because of all the shielding units like Secretive Sage, Shinhati, Tyrannus. It can be actually a little hard to even use Tarkin Town at all. So this is a very favored matchup. It would be one that any Talzin Yellow player, tempo control player, should be happy to see across from them. Sabine ECL, this was one of the most favored matchups in set 5, but with the addition of Nemec, it's gotten a lot tougher. I did some testing into my teammate Will, and he did have a winning record into me. Not insanely winning, but you know, in prior sets when we've done games, it has always been very clearly in set 5 when we did games, it was very clearly Talzin Yellow, and the card that was changing it the most was Nemec. Nemec being able to present, especially with initiative, a guaranteed 5 damage it's just insane. It can make this matchup pretty damn hard to excuse my language, pretty hard to navigate. But I still think it ends up falling on the side of Talzin Yellow, especially with like something like a third client come in, with maybe turrets coming in potentially into the main deck to disrupt ground a little bit. The way Sabine used to win this in set 5 was primarily through space, just hard mulliganing for a space line and hoping that it was enough to set up that like a Wrecker ECL would be enough to close the game, like a Wrecker ECL into a 4 cause would be enough to close the game. Drain Essence was the key way to interact with that, so having the 2 Drain Essence in the side in case Sabine ECL is around is kind of important to be able to kill the space unit on turn 1, not let them run away with the game through space. Overall, though, this should still be a pretty good matchup for Talzin Yellow. Client just does so much work here, and it's very hard to gain any type of ground control against Talzin Yellow. They really just have to just like get there in the first few turns, just push enough damage that the ECL Wrecker followed by a 4 cause is enough to close the game. Sabine Yellow, I currently have it at 50-50. I think this might not be right. I didn't do many games in the Sabine Yellow at all. I did end up playing against Rebel Resource in round 5 of the 3v3 team event. Had a crazy game on stream. Highly recommend watching it. I've been told by those that have watched it that it was just a really good game to watch. I ended up winning game 3 even though I bricked my turn 1. Had Client all 3 games. Client just did so much work. One of the things that Sabine ECL can do that Sabine Yellow can't really do as well is get Client off the board. Being able to, like, it's kind of funny that Sabine ECL actually, if Client is still around and shielded, might even want to ECL the Poe into the Client over the Talzin flip, just because if Client's just sitting there healing every turn, it's really hard for Sabine to close the game. One of the differences here as well is that Sabine ECL has Wrecker for reach, which is able to push that reach damage in one action without being interacted with, and 4 cause for non-interactive reach, while Sabine Yellow is trying to do stuff like Sneak Attack Lightmaker, which gives some room to respond to. Really, it's just Sneak Attack Fleet Lieutenant that can't be responded to, and then something like Chirrut from the like Chirrut being in the main deck would also help this matchup. But specifically Client, when the opponent isn't going very, very wide in space, like everything needs to be in space, including the leader, those are hard. But the leader deploys in the ground. They're only really playing 1 space unit a turn. Eventually, they're going to have their mix. They're eventually going to go ground 2. So with any type of Client line, this matchup does feel pretty good for Talzin. I would say that while I have it at a 50-50, it's probably somewhere in the green spectrum. Not really sure where. Ray Data Vault. This is a matchup that can actually outgrind Talzin, which actually doesn't really happen. Even though Talzin isn't going primarily for the grindy game plan, it is trying to play a more tempo game plan, like get units on the board and close the game by presenting units that also interact with the opponent. Does want to contain the opponent, but provide bodies that are then going to close the game. However, with the enticing reward, Talzin just has so much grind potential. However, Ray Data Vault might be one of the few decks that can, if not the only deck, that can actually outgrind Talzin Yellow with the enticing rewards. The issue with Foray is they don't really have anything. They're just playing like weak bodies with Restore, which doesn't really function well into stuff like Tyrannus, stuff like Assassin, like presenting bodies that just kill their bodies, and then Ray flipping on 6, having the whole issue with the 6 flip that has 6 health, just dying to Talzin with Hotshot, dying to Tyrannus with Hotshot, dying to Shinhati with Hotshot. It's very, very, very hard for Ray to navigate out of those early turns, and if there is any type of reasonable curve presented by Talzin, Ray normally just loses. The games can still go very, very long, but the only way Ray will win is if they somehow like fully contain the Talzin and end up being the aggressor, essentially. Kira Data Vault. I hesitate to even have this in the light green. I think it might be a darker green. I think it might be the middle green, like Ray Data Vault. It's very hard for Kira to just like Ray Data Vault to stick something to the board, and Kira really needs to be able to stick something to the board to have an OB target, to have a craving power target, to be able to get things low enough to use Devastating Gunship, to be able to use the secret CAD unit to kill something with 2 or less health. The issue that Kira has is Talzin is the one leader that survives Kira flip. 7 health, Kira flips, does 3 damage to Talzin. She's now at 4, and now Talzin herself can just attack into Kira, give her -1/-1 to kill her, and only take 3 damage back. So now Talzin's alive with 1 health. So Talzin flip basically holds the Kira flip hostage. and makes it very hard for Kira to present a body onto the board. With the Secret of Power CAD unit, there is some room for Kira to just action condense enough with the flip to then have a body to Overwhelming Barrage the next turn, so maybe it's changed those early turns a little bit, but for the most part, Talzin's just going to be, especially when Kira's taking a turn to ramp potentially, and then doesn't even necessarily want to flip after ramping, so they're not really going to be maximizing the use of the ramp, can be a little hard to get to the board. One of the things is, like, Shinhati is a little weaker now. So Shinhati is one of those cards that could hold the Kira flip hostage, along with Karis. So Karis 2/4, Kira flips, makes it a 2/2, and then Karis just attacks in, uses the when defeated trigger to finish off Kira. Shinhati, 4 power unit, Tyrannus can just ambush her. So, like, even if they do ramp, flip Kira, let's say they plot out a CAD or something, and then Tyrannus just comes down and ambushes the Kira, which cleans up the Kira. They are still left with the CAD in that case to have an Overwhelming Barrage target the following turn, but then the turn 1 play is still on the board. So Shinhati becomes a little weaker because of something like CAD, but there's still Tyrannus, there's still Karis to threaten the Kira flip, there's still the Talzin flip herself to threaten the Kira flip if they're trying to flip on the same turn. So I would say this is at least slightly favored for Talzin yellow, but there's definitely some debate to be had there. Very good Kira player might change that with the addition of Cad Bane unit. Looking at Boba, Pilot Boba, Data Vault, this is one of the hardest matchups. It's primarily space deck, going into big space unit, has planetary bombardment, just being able to hard mulligan for that ramp, having around a 70% chance of ramping with hard mulliganing for it, being able to deploy on the same turn, even with something like Bamboozle. So, like, they deploy and get bamboozled, it's still not even that terrible for them if they're able to also play something like Ruthless Raider that turn and then go into planetary bombardment turns. Like, one of the ways that I lost in BIATL was game 1 ramped, deployed Boba, got bamboozled, but then had planetary Ruthless Raider planetary, and then game 2 ramp Ruthless Raider planetary devastator. It just pushes damage really quickly. Client is very important here to mitigate. Bamboozle is very important here to mitigate, to, like, hurt the flip a little bit. But this is a really tough one to figure out. No Glory helps against Ruthless Raider. I think one of the things that needs to be looked at, which was Red Dragon's suggestion, is to look at Constructed Lightsaber again. If there's a window where they, like, just tap out for something, just slamming the Constructed Saber so it gets a guaranteed 4, and then disrupts their next turn because they have to spend some amount of resources dealing with the Constructed Saber, and then might not be able to play whatever they wanted to play that turn. Maybe there's some room there to race. So that's something that can be looked at. With Piet Red, very similar. Just going right into big space units that Talzin Yellow has an issue interacting with and racing against. Constructed Saber can be looked at here. Client's very important here. Maybe these aren't deep red anymore with Constructed Saber edition. Have to be looked at more. Somebody else can, like, if anybody figures out how to deal with these for this deck, then I think this deck is definitely one of the top contenders of the set. But currently, it just, like, it has to dodge space to finish up with Palp Yellow. This is, I think, very favored, although I don't really play against many good Palp Yellows. I'd be very interested in playing against a very good Palp Yellow, but every time I have, the only real way that they can win is to somehow survive to the flip turn, which can be hard. Constructed Saber, again, is very useful here, and having them not survive to the flip turn. And then on the flip turn, they have to pull Cad Bane from hand. So if they don't pull Cad Bane from hand on the flip turn and they flip and take a unit, Cad Bane just captures Talzin Yellow's unit back, and then when Cad Bane dies, he also now plops out a body again, making it just so hard for Palpatine to actually stabilize. Cad also being able to hotshot blaster for 9, which is something I meant to talk about earlier. One of the huge benefits of Cad Bane is being able to work in 9 damage interval or even an 18 damage interval with hotshot blaster. Being able to just do something like capture something, and then the opponent wants to do something else. Like, let's say they play even like, I don't know, like a Luke, and then go into the next round, and the first action from Talzin Yellow is capture the Luke, unless the Cad is answered. If Talzin Yellow untaps, they're now potentially presenting 9 damage. It's also one of the ways that one of the best ways to close against aggressive strategies. Just have Cad come down. Worst case scenario, he's just exhausting some stuff if he's dealt with, and then hotshot blaster for 9. If they're not in blue, if they don't have a way to deal with that, or like yellow for Waylay or something, which Waylay is kind of a little bit out of the meta at the moment. They don't have a good way to just deal with that hotshot blastered Cad. It could be an 18 damage interval where it's just hit for 9, and now if they don't have an answer, they might just have to claim, or Talzin Yellow is in a position where they can just claim and close the game with another 9 damage attack. So Palp Yellow, Cad Bane, very good against them. They do have the tools to pull it from hand. They have even more tools now with set 6 with the new additional discard plot card, which actually would help this matchup a lot. But then the issue is actually getting there. Palp Yellow can really struggle getting to the 8 resource turn. Talzin does have the ability to apply enough damage to kill them before it. So to close out with the matchups, there's a lot more than this. The meta is just extremely wide right now. I can't cover them all, at least not here. If there are any that you would like me to cover, please leave a comment. I can cover them in a future video. But with space decks, if anybody has ideas to figure that out, that's really what the deck really needs to figure out right now to be one of the top tier decks. And even with that being said, one thing is the space deck shouldn't really be played. Like, Han 1 Blue is going to struggle into the other mid-range value strategies. So because it doesn't have that, like I said, once you're past that mid-game where they have access to that early Anakin, they're able to get that early board presence. Once you're past that, the green heroic, just with stuff like Caloran, is just so much stronger that Han 1 Blue doesn't really have a spot in the meta, but it's being played currently. The space decks, they don't really have a good conversion rate into top performances at the end of last set. They probably won't this set either. I know Piet Red did well in a recent tournament, but probably shouldn't be being played. The issue is they are, so then especially in those early rounds when it's more likely to hit them, it just knocked Talzin Yellow out. That's what happened to me in Pool 1, Pool 2. I just hit 2 bad matchups in both pools in round 2 and 3, and I was just out. It felt terrible. I was like, why play this deck if, you know, there's the chance of just losing? That's kind of an issue with the meta in general at the moment. The exception being Adhan Tarkentown. Adhan Tarkentown, I think, is a very real deck. The plot cards just make that deck absolutely insane, especially with the addition of Syntha. Oh my god, that's crazy. Okay. So I'm saving this for another video, but this is my matchup spread from BIATL with the team event Pool 1, Pool 2. I'll be going into more detail about this in another video. I will say, in the team event specifically, the Von Reg yellow matchup and the Sabine yellow matchup were really crazy, and there were some things with the drafting that was really crazy. I'm looking forward to making a video about this. Looking at other versions of this deck that my team has looked at and worked on, there's the Sheen Flurry variant, there's a full control, like going for the fatigue style, Vigilance Mill Out, Bounty Hunter Crew, that style, that was really fun. The issue with the control Mill Out one, I think that was actually probably the most fun for me to play. I hate playing against those types of decks though, and I really hope they don't come into the game now that I'm not playing them anymore, because, I mean, they're just not fun to play against. The issue with that deck, it just draws. It draws way too much. If it's not a 1-0 go to time or a 2-0, if it's ever going to a game 3, it's probably going to be a draw. It is not fun to play. I played it for like 2 PQs and then moved away from it because I drew like twice in the first 3 rounds, both times. or in one of the times, and then the other time I actually did make it, but then ended up having did make it towards the end, but then ended up having a draw at the end, which messed me up. And then Sheen Flurry, really fun version. Talzin's Assassin, amazing with Sheen Flurry. Uh, Obviously Anakin, but like then you're waiting till 7 resources to use him. I don't think Darth Vader would. So these are old lists that I pulled up to just throw in here to talk about briefly. I don't think Darth Vader would remain if I went back to this list. He's just not a good unit without Sheen Flurry, and then having to wait till 7 to play him just isn't that good. So while it's really my best experience with Sheen Flurry is having it as a tech card, like having it as a one of when Assassin's in the main deck. So like when Assassin's really good in the meta, and Anakin's also being played, obviously that's probably a staple of the deck going forward in general. And like a one of Sheen Flurry can be pretty powerful. It's something to consider. Assassin with Sheen Flurry just kills any leader deploy. It is absolutely insane. 2 other versions that have been looked at: the Krennic package with Owen Lars and Greedo and Karis and Night Sister Warrior. It's kind of doing something very similar to Talzin Red, but it just does it worse. At that point, there's very little reason not to just play Talzin Red. You get access to stuff like Surprise Strike, Hotshot Blaster for 3, have Cad Bane for the top end bomb, which is a very good 7-drop for a tempo style deck. But I think just play red at that point. The one defeateds are just much better, and you have more of them. And lastly, now there are 2, which I haven't revisited that one yet. For this set, it gains Nihilus now, which could be something worth looking at, but Nihilus kills. It could even kill itself. It kills Tyrannus. Like, it kills friendly Tyrannus if that's the lowest one. Now there are 2 is something that I had a lot of fun using when I was working on Cad Green, and I like the fact that it can function in the Talzin shell, but I don't think it really works. I think the deck identity has really been nailed down as tempo control for this color combination with Talzin. So other things that we've looked at, Legacy Run is a pretty good option for looking at for space, but has some downsides. Lom Pike. The toolkit for this deck is very, very deep. It would probably require an entire another video to just like deep dive into the toolkit for this deck. Some closing thoughts. I'm not sure if I'm going to be playing Talzin Yellow for the PQ season. I'm not even sure how many PQs I'm going to be playing in this season. I've got a lot going on, so there's some issues with having the time to go to events. Luckily, there are like 4 within an hour for me. I live in a very dense. The Northeast is has a very high amount of SWU players and a lot of very good SWU players, and gets a lot of events, which is very nice. So there's 4 within an hour for me. Not sure how many I'm doing. Not sure if I'm going to be playing Talzin Yellow. If I could figure out the space matchups, then I am a lot more open to it. If space isn't as big in the meta, which I really don't think it should be, then I'd be open to playing it. But other decks that I'm considering, obviously Anakin Data Vault and Han 1 Green. Basically, those are like the de facto McClunky decks at the moment. Like, Philip's just absolutely phenomenal on Han 1 Green, and Grumpy, Tyler, Dark, and Pasquale crushing it with Anakin Data Vault at BIATL, a deck that they all that Pasquale and Grumpy Elephant worked on. Han2 ECL was one of my favorite decks to work on during spoiler season and like preparation for BIATL. I absolutely love that deck. I think it has a lot of power, being able to do stuff like produce a 4 or 5 space unit on turn 2 with unit Poe, Amidala, being able to play something discounted in the Bounty Hunter Quarry. It's just doing a lot of really powerful things. Being able to play Gorilla Attack Pod as a 6 ready unit. Like, it's just a really powerful deck. Adhan Tarkentown, another deck that I think Han2 ECL and Adhan Tarkentown, well, I guess Anakin Data Vault, like, those are probably the decks that have gained the most from this set, at least as far as I've seen at this point. And I've really enjoyed playing all of them. Like I said, the Adhan Tarkentown thing with the deploy, especially if you go to 6 resources with Synta and Sudden Ferocity, but even just on 5, it can do some really cool things on 5. It also has access to like Sneak Attack Lightmaker if it wants to do something like that. So I could end up playing one of those. Obviously, I'm a sucker for Talzin Yellow. I've been on it even despite having a lot of troubles with it in the Force Throw meta. I stuck to it, but I do really want to see how it does. with force throw being gone from the meta now. If you like this, please comment, like, subscribe. I am interested in making more content. My current issue is I'm a primary caregiver. I am finishing a master's degree. I don't really have the time to make content, but I'm very interested in doing it. So if there is interests and requests, I will make the time for it. We'll start producing more videos. So let me know what you want to see, and I will get it out there. And lastly, I am interested in taking on coaching. So I will start this out pretty cheap for the first people that are interested. I am looking to offer, $15 half-hour sessions, $25 full-hour sessions. If you're interested, you can email me at getsucoaching@gmail.com or reach out to me through the McClunky Discord. I will have the link to the McClunky Discord and that email posted in the description of this video. So feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching. May the cards be with you, and good luck in the upcoming PQ season. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great day, have a great night, whatever it may be.